Hello. So, okay, we are live, I think. So today we have the 15th Angular Athens meetup. We're going to hold this meetup in English because we have two foreign speakers. So, Katerina, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hi, Stefanos, and hi, everyone.
So today we have three talks. One from James Henry, who is the creator of TypeScript ESLint and Angular ESLint, and he's going to talk about this topic, how we can introduce ESLint in our Angular application, and how we can migrate also from TSLint to Angular ESLint. Also, we have one lightning talk from Aristides Babakos about how we can. What is this talk about? About how we can electronify our Angular apps, and also one more talk about from Alex Kotlin about localization in our Angular apps. Yeah, I wanted to share my screen. I have some slides.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll click the share button. Okay, I'm clicking it.
Okay, so yeah, we started. Yeah, I wanted to say also a few things about this meetup for people that they joined recently. We started this meetup in 2017, and yeah, for 3 years now we have the same goals. We want to create a nice community in Athens. We want to share knowledge, to get to know each other. So these are our values. This is what we try to do. And for this, we have the main communication channel, which is Slack. We are thinking about, new ways. For example, Discord is something that we are thinking of, but for the moment, Slack is our main channel. And you can connect with us on LinkedIn, also on Twitter, also on Instagram. And of course, every Thursday, if you don't know this, we have office hours at 6 o'clock. And there we discuss different topics, questions that you might have, or basically whatever you want to discuss with us. So every Thursday at 6 o'clock. And of course, if you want to give a talk, feel free to send your idea on this link. We are going to post this as a comment on YouTube as well. And yeah, that's it as a small introduction from us. I think we can introduce our first speaker, James. Oops.
Oops, sorry. Removed. So yeah, will you introduce James now?
Mhm. I think you know James very well from Norway.
Yes. And he also actually visited Athens in person to give a talk at our meetup. I think it was 1.5 years ago, back then, when we could travel still. Yes. So yeah, he's a recurring guest. What more should we say about James? Or we could leave James. Should I add him to the stream?
Yeah.
James, you're being added to the stream. Hi, James.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And we hope after everything ends and we're all healthy and okay and happy, you can visit us again.
Definitely.
So are you ready to take up the stage?
I am ready.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So good luck.
Good luck. See you later.
Thank
Bye.
you. So I will share my screen, and then hopefully through the magic of StreamYard, it will appear on your screen. Looks like it. We're getting Inception there. Cool. Thank you very much. I've got my Greece-themed deck here. Certainly no designer, and it's not the most beautiful deck in the world, but hopefully it does the job. As we've heard, I'm going to be chatting about linting today. I've ended up kind of becoming the linting guy, if you like, in a lot of projects in a lot of ways. I'm going to cover a little bit of the history of that and how we got to this point with how do we lint TypeScript code and what the evolution of that has been. And then because this is Angular Athens, we're going to focus on what that means for us when we're using the Angular CLI and how we can use ESLint in our projects. That might involve starting a new project today, in which case you can just get straight on with using ESLint. But it might also mean that you're coming from an existing project, so you're more likely to have TSLint set up in that project. And I'm going to cover how we can leverage some of this tooling to help us on that journey and migrate our setups and our configurations for us. So just to round off the introduction for me, I'm Microsoft MVP for TypeScript because I've worked on that tooling quite a lot and helped build up some of the community aspects of that. That TypeScript passion that I've had for a lot of years also manifested in contributions to other open source tools. So I created TypeScript ESLint, which is a heavy moving part of this equation. And I also helped contribute to the TypeScript support inside of Babel. So I got added to the Babel team. And I also added the TypeScript parsing support in Prettier as well. So using TypeScript and putting TypeScript into other tools is definitely, I would say, an accidental hobby of mine. If you're interested in reading or watching anything I've produced, I do have some courses on TypeScriptCourses.com and jameshenry.blog. I need to produce more content, and now that the world is hopefully emerging from the recent past, we may not be traveling yet, but I'm in a much better place to start producing a bit more content, so I'm looking forward to that. And I work as a consultant architect with Narwhal, where we help large companies make the most of a lot of these tools that we're going to talk about, including Angular, including ESLint. And so if you're interested in checking out Narwhal or NX, the open source toolkit that they maintain, please check out narwhal.io or nx.dev. Cool. So this is a single slide where I'm now going to regale you with the tales of linting in TypeScript and my perspective on it. So where we're at today is that we have one linter to choose from when it comes to TypeScript. That's ESLint. That's not always been the case. So originally, ESLint, as a very, very popular JavaScript linter, had no way of supporting anything other than JavaScript. And TypeScript was emerging from kind of 2012 onwards as an increasingly popular tool for writing JavaScript in a way that scaled. So you basically had to make a choice between using TypeScript or using ESLint when we were in that world. So Palantir created a project called TSLint, specifically re-implementing a linter from scratch to help write static analysis rules for your TypeScript code that sits on top of TypeScript, in addition to the static analysis it already provides. That literally is what it sounds like. They had to create every single aspect of a linter and every single feature of a linter from scratch, as well as writing every single rule from scratch. So none of the prior work that had been done on ESLint could be benefited from by TSLint because it was an entirely different tool working on entirely different internals designed to work on top of TypeScript. In 2015, roughly, Nicholas Arcus, the creator of ESLint, prototyped what it would be like to have an AST transformation step inside of ESLint. And the AST, abstract syntax tree, is basically a big metadata object that is used for the machine to understand your code more so than the free text version that we all type into our editors. And it's a key part of how both TypeScript and a linter need to function. So that prototype of transforming this AST from the TypeScript AST that gets produced by the TypeScript compiler into another AST, which ESLint can understand, was successful. And it's not something that Nicholas wanted to pursue personally because he wasn't a TypeScript user at the time. I believe he's still not a TypeScript user primarily. So it was something where I jumped in, and it was something that I was super passionate about because I didn't like this fact that you had to choose between TypeScript or ESLint. I really wanted to use both tools. I didn't want to have to switch linters. So I took that prototype and I ran with it, and I worked on it essentially exclusively. So while being part of the ESLint team, I wasn't really contributing much to anything other than the TypeScript support. And I was working on that any hours I could spare with my open source time. So that is one of those types of things where you can get the 80% working quite quickly, and then the 20% is where you spend all the time, just the edge cases, the additional features and functionality of building linting on top of TypeScript. But relatively quickly, I was able to get a lot of confidence that this was worth pursuing and worth doing, and essentially just kept at it over the course of years in my spare time. Obviously, life happens in between, so there were periods where there wasn't as much time available. But eventually, it became clear that TypeScript ESLint needed to spin out and become its own project. It couldn't just keep going under the ESLint umbrella when I was the only one driving it, and it was kind of it didn't really fit with the other areas of ESLint. So I created the project called TypeScript ESLint, and that is now and still where it lives, in TypeScript ESLint /TypeScript ESLint on GitHub. It's downloaded a lot. It's used by Create React App. It's used now in an Angular context. It's used in the Vue ecosystem. It's used in Node. So yeah, it's downloaded a lot, tens of millions of times a month. And it grew to, I think, an area where I couldn't even anticipate that it would be as popular. And part of this was facilitated by this other key milestone that happened, where the TypeScript team themselves decided to use TypeScript ESLint instead of TSLint, because they saw it as a way to unify the ecosystem a bit more. And it was around this time that Palantir wrote a blog post saying that they would be deprecating TSLint and eventually discontinuing it altogether for this reason, so that focus could be put on one set of tooling which the whole ecosystem could benefit from. And some of those disadvantages I mentioned earlier around having to re-implement features, re-implement rules, were no longer true. We could benefit from auto-fixing in ESLint, whether we were using TypeScript or JavaScript. We could benefit from the caching. We could benefit from any more advancements that come down the pipe in ESLint itself. We can benefit from with TypeScript ESLint, whereas the case used to be that you would have to implement everything from scratch on the TSLint side. So we're now at a point where that deprecation period and that sunsetting has happened. TSLint is no longer actively maintained. And a lot of the ecosystem, well, some of the ecosystem never started with TSLint because this was on the horizon already. So for example, Create React App went straight to TypeScript ESLint. But Angular obviously was a very early adopter of TypeScript, and the adoption by the Angular team helped drive the growth of TypeScript itself. So TypeScript in Angular has always been using TSLint for linting. And any project you generated with the Angular CLI would generate you a TSLint setup. Now that we're at the point where TSLint is no longer being actively maintained, it makes sense to think about how can we write our Angular projects with ESLint instead of TSLint. So that brings us on to the remaining items. That is the history, the whirlwind tour of how we got here. And I'd like to spend the rest of the time talking about how linting actually works in the CLI, just so you have a better idea of what does it actually mean to go from TSLint support to ESLint support, and therefore what is the kind of tooling I've been working on that's specific to Angular. So everything I've mentioned so far is generic to TypeScript plus ESLint. But what we'll focus on now is what needs to go on top of that to give Angular support with ESLint the best chance of working. And then finally, we'll round it off with, if you've got any existing projects, what can you do to not leave them on TSLint and bring them forward to ESLint? So how does linting work in the Angular CLI? It's a combination of two main moving parts. One of them has nothing to do with the CLI specifically at all, and that is a configuration file for your particular lint tooling. So in the case of TSLint, that's a tslint.json file. In the case of ESLint, there's a number of different configuration file formats, but the closest one to tslint.json is .eslintrc.json. And you can see an example structure here of a tslint.json file. Ultimately, they're relatively similar because tslint was evolving to emulate ESLint most of the time. So you'll see common things like extending from other configs. You'll see shared rules of some kind, and you'll see a rules object defining keys and values where the keys are rule names and the values are enabling or disabling rules plus some optional configuration in the case of some rules. So this is generic. This is not specific to Angular at all. This is just, we need to configure the tool. So this works the same way as your Karma configuration files or Jest if you're using that tool set, Cypress.json, any other kind of tooling that you want to configure likely has some kind of configuration file. So nothing that we put in here is coupled to the Angular CLI toolset at all. The other main piece is what's called a target. And a target is wired up inside of your angular.json file. So commonly, the Angular CLI has been generating for you a lint target, a target called lint in your Angular.json for any projects that you create. And a lint target is defined inside of an architect object, which I've not captured here. But you'll recognize it, I'm sure, from your configuration, your Angular.json configuration. A target is powered by a builder. This is an implementation of the TSLint builder that the Angular CLI team has maintained up until this point. And a builder can take options. So in the case of this TSLint builder, it's looking for TypeScript configuration files in order to create TypeScript programs for your files when it runs linting, so that it can give you type-aware rules that work on more than just syntax, which is what ESLint would give you out of the box. And then you add on TypeScript ESLint to be able to have this same kind of functionality. So those are the two moving pieces. So when we think about moving from TSLint to an ESLint context, what we're really talking about is we need an equivalent of this rules configuration and plugins and all the rest of it. And we need an equivalent of this target configuration so that we can actually run ng-lint and have it invoke ESLint instead of TSLint. So this is where this additional tool set on top of TypeScript ESLint called Angular ESLint comes in, and it's available at this GitHub location. I've been working on this for a little while, and there's a few interesting moving parts. We won't be able to go into massive depth on any of those moving parts in this session, but time allowing, I'll cover a few of them. And I was recently on Angular Air where we covered some of these things in a lot of depth. So you can go and have a look at that episode if you're interested. This will be more about kind of invoking these tools and converting and stuff like that. So the Angular ESLint toolset provides a number of different packages, and those packages are responsible for different things. So when we think about the targets that we need some kind of implementation that's an equivalent to this at Angular dev kit build Angular TSLint. We need an implementation that wraps ESLint. So that's one of the main things that this toolset does. It has a package called builder, which is an implementation of an ESLint builder, and that can be wired up in your Angular JSON file. It also contains, in fact, let's open that repo and have a look. I will bump the zoom a bit just in case. I'll assume it's bad. One more time. My laptop's kind of ignoring me. There we go. So it's a mono repo. It contains a number of different packages. If I go into packages, here are the packages that Angular ESLint is working with. So we have our builder. That's our implementation of that builder that can be used inside of an Angular JSON. We have 2 plugins. The ESLint plugin contains TypeScript rules which are specific to Angular. So the closest equivalent to this is Codalizer from the TSLint world. So in fact, this to date has largely been a port of Codalizer. So implementing the Codalizer existing rules in ESLint so that they can be used with that tool set. And we also have ESLint plugin template, which contains, again, a number of Codalizer rules that are compatible with .html files, your templates, or your inline templates that live in the template definition within your component metadata. As well as that, we have schematics. So these help us with code generation and with running automated migrations, which we'll look at in a minute. We have a template parser. Now, this is a parser in the ESLint sense. So one of these key enablers for ESLint to support things which aren't JavaScript is that you can give ESLint an implementation of an ESLint parser, and that can be responsible for building up this AST and doing stuff with it and providing that to the rules that then execute when ESLint runs. So in the case of TypeScript ESLint, we wrap the TypeScript compiler in order to parse your code and build up these programs so that we can work with that AST. And in the case of this Angular template parser, I'm wrapping the Angular compiler and parsing your template code using the utilities that live inside the Angular compiler. It has its own unique AST for your templates behind the scenes. I leverage that and I teach ESLint how to traverse that AST structure to call into rules in the right way so that those rules can be written to give feedback on your HTML. And then finally, there's a couple of kind of helper packages. One's utils for helping you write rules, and one's integration tests, where I have a number of different Angular CLI workspaces that I run end-to-end tests on, basically, to make sure that when I make a change, everything all still works nicely together. So Angular ESLint is the kind of key library, key monorepo that has a number of packages in it. And we can look at how we can leverage it to create brand new Angular CLI projects today that only use ESLint. That's the simplest case. So in order to do this, obviously you can follow along with the README on Angular ESLint to do this yourself, but this is the key kind of setup instructions. You would install Angular CLI in the same way that you do currently, however you prefer. Maybe that's with npm install global, maybe it's with Yarn, maybe it's with Volta or similar tools that kind of handle that for you. And you would also install the core and schematics packages within Angular DevKit, as well as the schematics package that I provide from Angular ESLint. Once you have those installed, you're all ready to go. And you need to use ng-new, which you're probably familiar with, for scaffolding new Angular CLI workspaces from scratch. But the difference is you're going to instruct ng-new to use a custom schematics collection. So you just pass -- collection equals, and then you give it Angular-ESLint schematics as the custom collection to use. This will look very familiar. When you start using it, you'll still get your interactive prompts around what should it be called, etc. But then it will delegate to my collection, and that collection will kick in. And basically, as of version 11, which is the current major version, Angular CLI wants to generate a TSLint setup for you. When this runs and delegates to my custom collection, behind the scenes, I remove all of that TSLint stuff for you. So it will uninstall TSLint, it will uninstall Codalizer, it will delete the implementation of the target, the lint target, and it will replace that lint target with an ESLint one. And it will also add a recommended .eslintrc.json file, as well as remove the tslint.json file that the Angular CLI would have generated. Quick sip. So if you're eagle-eyed, you'll see some of this activity happening on the command line when you run this. But if you just run this command, the end result when it finishes, when you go to that workspace you've just generated, is that you will only see ESLint and you won't see any traces of TSLint. So it is already possible in version 11 of the Angular CLI to start a brand new project and not use TSLint at all. For version 12 of the Angular CLI onwards, this is in pre-release right now and will become the major version, I think, in roughly a month's time. The team will no longer generate ESLint, a lint target for your projects at all. So there will be no implementation. If you run ng-lint, it will error, and it will tell you that you need to install a package which adds a corresponding implementation of that target. And it will actually tell you about installing Angular ESLint. So that will be the behavior from the next version, next major version, version 12 of the Angular CLI onwards. So I'll show you on the next slide what that looks like, because it's very similar to the migration story. But essentially, for me as the maintainer of this toolset, all I need to do is make it so that this command is no longer trying to clean up any of the ESLint stuff. It just wants to add the ESLint stuff. So everything should still work the same, whether you're running this in version 11 or next month, version 12. What I'm going to do, my plan, is to change the major version of Angular ESLint to match the Angular version, the major version of Angular. So I'm going to do that at version 12. So right now it's version 2, Angular ESLint. I'm going to be releasing a version 3 because there's some breaking changes I want to make. But when Angular switches to version 12, I'm going to switch Angular ESLint to version 12 as well. And so from then on, it's going to be super straightforward to know which version of Angular ESLint you need. It's always the same major version as the Angular CLI version and the Angular framework version. This has worked well for other libraries, and I think it just makes sense. We won't need to do frequent breaking changes to this tool set. So from version 12, just expect these versions will be aligned. Cool. So obviously, currently, as things stand today, the more common case is that you have an existing project and you're looking to migrate it from ESLint to ESLint. And naturally, this is not a trivial thing to do. Anytime you move between two tools that were maintained by two different sets of people with two different sets of priorities and two different configurations, etc., it's going to be tricky. And to a certain extent, the amount of work you have to put into this is specific to how much customization you have done on your workspace. However, we're able to leverage some tooling to automate a lot of this stuff for you. So just like I mentioned with version 12 not having a lint implementation, if you already have an Angular CLI workspace, you can run ng-add, which is a standard command from the Angular CLI for adding third-party schematics to your workspace. You can run ng-add Angular ESLint schematics on your existing project. When you install Angular ESLint schematics using this command, it picks up on the fact that Angular ESLint has implemented an ng-add schematic, and that gets invoked. And then it handles installing all of the remaining ESLint tooling you need to make this work. So it installs ESLint, installs TypeScript ESLint, a couple of different packages from that. And it also, in the future, will likely set your default collection of schematics to be this schematic set so that you can just generate things without needing to worry about whether ESLint is going to be present or not. Once you've run this command, you've effectively updated your package JSON and all the installs have completed. You're then ready to run the migration schematic from this same collection to take a project that's currently running ESLint and migrate it to ESLint. So the way we do that is because it's a schematic, we invoke it using the generate command. So ng-generate or ngg. We then give it the name of the schematics collection. So in this case, at angular-eslint/schematics, then a colon, then the name of the schematic within that collection that we want to invoke. So I called it very simply convert ESLint to ESLint. And then we give it the name of the project. So if you're operating with just a standard CLI workspace, you might only have a single project in there, but you'll notice in your Angular JSON, it's still defined as a project entry in the projects map that you've got in there in your JSON file. So you just need to look up what the project name is inside of there. If you have a monorepo style with Angular CLI, you'll have multiple projects in there and you can migrate them one at a time. So when you run this, in a similar way to how I described some of the cleanup work that the -- collection ng-new command did. When we see this, we're going to remove the lint target and replace it with an ESLint one using the Angular ESLint builder. We're going to delete the tslint.json file. But the big difference is before we delete it, we're actually going to read it and we're going to pass it to a tool that lives on TypeScript ESLint in TypeScript ESLint's kind of system. Over here. So within the TypeScript ESLint monorepo is the main place where we maintain the tooling. But we also have this other package, which has been heroically maintained by Josh for converting your configs. So this package, this library, is entirely dedicated to knowing this tslint rule equals the equivalent of this ESLint rule. So it's a key part. It's the source of truth for your config conversions inside of this schematic that runs. And so we use this library to just run that operation to figure out, of the tslint rules you've got specified, what's the closest possible ESLint config we can give you. So essentially the schematic that we have for converting inside of here is going to handle combining our recommended configuration with your actual tslint configuration's converted equivalent. So it's going to merge those two concepts together so that you not only have a working setup that's very close to what we recommend, but you also maintain, if you had a lint setup that you were happy with, you get as close as possible to that in your converted state. Now, when you've done that, you might see in some of the logs that come from this command, actually executing the schematic, that some of the rules couldn't have been converted. This is getting rarer and rarer because, like I mentioned, this tool has been really well maintained by Josh, and it has a lot of converters in here for the common rules. But you may see in the logs that a certain rule couldn't be converted, and it will basically make it clear which one that was. And it's up to you. This is the kind of case where if you're using custom rules or rules that maybe are not so popular that have come from the ecosystem, you can either, if you know that there's an equivalent already that exists in ESLint, you could submit it as a PR to tslint to ESLint config so that everyone can benefit from that conversion logic in the future. Or it might be something where you're like, oh, you know what? I don't really need that. Lint rule isn't adding a lot of value. That's fine. I'll just leave it. So we'll give you all the information we can, and we'll do 99% of the work that can possibly be automated. There may be a small amount left that you need to decide on a case-by-case basis how you want to handle. But if you've got an existing TSLint workspace today, I highly recommend you checking this out. If you have any feedback, please let me know on Angular ESLint repo. And yeah, good luck with the conversion. In some cases, people have been able to just run these two commands and everything has happened exactly as they expected. That's largely obviously the case if you've stuck close to what the CLI gave you out of the box and you've not used custom rules in TSLint. So I think I just about have a couple more minutes. If the Angular Athens folks want to interrupt me at any point, that's absolutely fine. But I just thought as a final piece, this is the Angular ESLint repo that I showed you before. And if you're ever looking for inspiration on what some of this stuff might look like when it's converted, you can come into the integration test and have a look at fixtures. And I actually have some examples that I run integration tests on of different workspaces. So I have a multi-project manual config here, meaning I wired up the ESLint config by hand, just as a testing ground. And this Angular JSON contains obviously projects that are configured to use ESLint. So if I come here you can see the ESLint equivalent of the TSLint builder I showed you before is Angular ESLint builder, and then the name of the implementation is lint. So in the case of the Angular ESLint builder, we're giving it a set of patterns to lint for us. So we're matching against all the TS files of our project and all the HTML files of our project. That linter is going to invoke the ESLint config for a particular project. So these names were randomly generated. ESLint rc.json is our project level config. It's going to extend from our root level config. And this is how we let TypeScript ESLint know about these tsconfig files that it will use to build the program, or programs in this case, for knowing how to do type-aware rules that use type information, not just syntax. And because it's extending from the root, we can have a look at that. And I got some documentation in line for this kind of handcrafted setup. But this gives you an idea of what this stuff might look like. So I provide a couple of different extendable configurations out of the box. So you can extend from an ng CLI compat config, which will get you as close as possible to today's ESLint setup, which is what I've used in this example. And then I explain on how we make inline templates work using this special extension. And here's some examples of configuring some rules. So you might recognize the directive selector and the component selector in an Angular context. So making sure our app components always start with app and our directives always start with app in camel casing versus kebab casing, those kind of things. So this is a good resource. It's open source. Obviously, take a look on how it works. But ultimately, the tooling is all ready for you to use. So you should just try running it, as I've shown you in the deck, on your own apps. Obviously, it's all version controlled, so you don't need to commit the result if you're not happy with it. And yeah, let me know any feedback on the repo. So that covers us off today. I would finish by saying, if you are feeling under pressure to migrate from ESLint to ESLint, I want to reassure you that that pressure isn't there. ESLint may not be actively maintained, but as a developer tool that runs purely on your machine and on a CI server before any code is deployed anywhere to any users, it's relatively safe, and it's not going to stop working all of a sudden. There just won't be active features and new rules being developed for it. So this is not something you need to jump on immediately, and you don't have to switch as soon as possible. But this tooling is there for you. Please try it out and let me know if you've got any feedback. Ευχαριστώ.
Παρακαλούμε. You're welcome. Okay, very listening. I think we have some questions for you. So we have a Q&A session now for 10 minutes, maybe less. So I'm going to, I think Theophilus will help with the questions. So Katerina, if you want to,
Hello from me. Thank you, James. It was great to learning about using Angular today. Our audience have a couple of questions for you. Beginning with Matteo. He asks, I saw that NX installs many packages to support ESLint. Why not to have a meta package to install all of them as automatic dependencies?
Okay, so yeah, NX, which I didn't really cover in any great detail in this talk, it's supported Angular and ESLint as a combination for a little while. It leverages the Angular ESLint toolset because I contribute to NX as well. Obviously, it's very easy to combine them the two. So it uses a couple of different TypeScript to ESLint packages and a couple of different Angular ESLint packages. There isn't any major objective argument either way to combine. If I understand the question correctly, I'm assuming you're saying, why isn't there some kind of TypeScript-ESLint which installs behind the scenes all of the @TypeScript ESLint / something packages? There isn't any major reason for that or any major reason against that. Obviously, you still end up with the same weight on disk. Arguably, in some cases, you end up with more than you need. The trouble is, the reason why they exist as different packages in the first place is because not every use case calls for all the things. For example, Prettia's TypeScript parsing support originally, and still to this day by default, uses just the parser and AST transformation step that I created for TypeScript ESLint, just that piece. So we need to publish that package for Prettia to consume. And there are other cases where NX only uses a piece of the Angular ESLint toolset. It doesn't use all of it. Whereas if you use it in an Angular context directly, it does use all of it. So these questions about how we bundle these in meta packages, then they're not super straightforward to answer. And there's a dubious benefit, given it's still the same weight in your node modules. There's a few extra lines in your package JSON. That's the only kind of downside, I guess you could call it, but it's so minor that it's not been an area of any real focus, or to be honest, there's not been too many complaints about it either.
Okay, one more question from Yanis. Do you have any custom lint rules that you have seen that stand out? For example, some funny ones or some that you find very useful?
I suddenly feel like I'm disappointed in myself that I don't have any good funny examples. It's all a bit too serious in the linting world, I think. I personally, the irony of how many hours I've spent on linting stuff is that I personally run incredibly lightweight linting setups myself. So I always find it very strange when people say, I hate linters, because linters do literally nothing until you configure them to do something. So you hate your specific lint configuration would be the accurate way of saying that. And I find it very, very strange. A linter is just a tool for static analysis, which only works if you give it some rules to tell you about. So for me, I run very lightweight linting rules because I'm frequently contributing to code bases where I want to only enforce conventions if they truly add value. And it's debatable. It's always subjective about what that means for any particular project. I really don't like when linters are used for stylistic concerns. I strongly believe a dedicated code formatter is the way to go for that. So I strongly advise don't use a linter to enforce indentation, semicolons, things like that. Things like that can be handled by a formatter like Prettier or Clang format. So those are the main things I would say on that. But yeah, for me, I like to run fairly lightweight linting setups. And if you have a particular convention at your company, you need to back that convention up by tooling, in my opinion. So that's a good use case for writing a custom rule. Or you just drop the convention. You just admit to yourselves that it can't be enforced, therefore it's not valuable enough. And that's usually how I approach these things.
Okay, Jan asks another question. How much could one have to be worried when installing custom linter rules in regards to performance?
Yeah, so rules are, they can be a source of performance issues potentially. So I have a whole section on performance on the Angular ESLint repo README. There's also a really good performance section written by Brad Zacher, core maintainer of TypeScript ESLint, on the TypeScript ESLint repo. They cover some of the pitfalls primarily with your tsconfig setup that you can cause performance issues. So please have a read of those and try and understand how those pieces fit together. But there are also some rules called out on the TypeScript ESLint README around performance that can negatively impact things because they try and do a lot behind the scenes. They try and build up kind of import graphs. For example, like ESLint plugin import has some rules on it that are very expensive because it tries to trace all of your import statements and figure out how some of them fit together. It's all within the context of a rule. So there are certain cases like that which can be very expensive. There is more than one way to run Prettier alongside ESLint. And one of those ways involves actually running Prettier inside of an ESLint plugin. Not all of the ways do that, but one of them does. And that's also a very expensive approach because you're dealing with fixing things inside of a linter, but using Prettier. So there's a double pass of your source code happening by doing it that way within one process. So it is possible for lint rules to do that. On the whole, lint rules are quite simple often. Just analyzing some of your syntax, saying if it matches this pattern, error. If it doesn't, don't. So I would check out those two sources. Angular ESLint, I've got a section on performance in the top level README. TypeScript ESLint, it's in an FAQ section, I think. But if you go and look at that on the performance, it calls out some rules that you should try and avoid. But otherwise, obviously, it's just a case of measuring your own your own linting setups and seeing if there are any issues. You can run ESLint with debug, and if you go on eslint.org, it will tell you how to run, so you can profile the speed of your execution, and it will show you on a rule-by-rule basis how long each rule is taking to execute. So that can also help you find troublesome rules in your setups.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
For your answers.
All right. Thank you, James.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we know that you had also a long day, so yeah, we appreciate that you you were here today for this talk.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So I think.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I was saying thank you very much and these types of things. Okay, so I guess goodbye, James.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye. And I'm removing Theoklitos. And I'm removing myself. And I will leave Stefanos to make an intro for our next speaker. Okay?
Yes. Yeah, before that, I wanted to, because we cannot post links on the comments section on YouTube. So if someone wants to submit a talk in Angular Athens Meetup, please go to the page of the Angular Athens Meetup, and you can find the link under the tab that is called, let me see, I think Angular, under the first tab, basically. So now I want to, there is the first tab, which is the About tab. So you can find all the information there, how you can submit a talk, how you can join the Slack channel, and also the link for the office hours. So now I want to introduce Aristides. Aristides is he's
hello, Stefanos.
Hello. He's one of the.
How are you?
I'm good.
You can leave the introductions because everybody knows me, you know.
Yeah.
I'm joking. I can make my introduction myself, no problem. I just want to say that I'm very happy to be here again.
Yeah. Okay. So then I will leave you to make your introduction, and
thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Okay. I bet that from now you will see my screen, right? So my name is Aristides Bampakos, but you can call me Aris because it's shorter, and I'm from Greece. Today I'm going to show you in 10 minutes how to electronify your Angular application. In other words, how to run your Angular application in desktop mode with Electron. Yes, we will do it because we can. So let me tell you some things about me. I work as a front-end web developer at a company called Plexearth, and I'm also a good developer expert for the Angular framework. I am also a co-organizer in this meetup that you are watching now, the Angular Athens meetup, and I also work as a senior Angular instructor at a private educational institute called CodeHub. I'm a very huge fan of Assassin's Creed, as you can see from the flag behind me, or my new hoodie, which is Assassin's Creed, right? But unfortunately, the last 2 years, I don't have enough time to play my video games. Why? Because I spent most of the time authoring books for publishing. I have already written a book about Angular, which is this one, right? Which is called Learning Angular 3rd Edition. And it is a book destined for beginners. It guides you how to create an Angular application from scratch using Angular CLI up to deploy it to your web server. And it contains also a bonus chapter, how to create a real-world application with Angular based on the knowledge that you have acquired through this book. You can find it on Amazon and on Pact website. And I'm now finishing my new book, which is called Angular Projects Second Edition. It is a book that is destined for intermediate and advanced Angular developers, and it actually showcases how to build 10 different applications with Angular and 10 different hot cutting-edge technologies. For example, each chapter is a different project. One chapter, you can create an NX monorepo application with NGRX. Another one, you can create a mobile application using Ionic. A different one, you can see how to create Angular and Electron applications, and many, many more. This book is available to pre-order now from the Amazon website. I have also put a link in this slide for a Google form that you can enter your email and get notified when it will be officially published. And also there is a QR code that you can scan. We're estimating that the book will be available at the middle of May or on the beginning of June. So stay tuned. Right, so today I'm gonna show you my new Angular library, the NGX Electronify, which is this one. And I will make you a demo on how to run it in your Angular application and view your application in desktop mode. You can install it with the add schematic, the ng-add NGX Electronify, and it supports Angular CLI applications and NX monorepo applications. For example, when you want to install it in a specific project of your monorepo, you can run ng-add NGX Electronify -- project and put the project of your choice. So let me share my code. Okay. So here we have an ordinary Angular CLI application. I have used the ng-new command to create one. And not something fancy, just the skeleton applications that we get from using the Angular CLI. So if I run it using ngserve, Greek, sorry, I used to code in Greek, yeah. And now we're waiting for the application to run in serve mode. Okay, so if we open this application in our browser, you can see that it loads correctly. Nothing fancy here. So I will stop now the server and use the library, the NGX Electronify, to run the same application in desktop mode. How do I run it? I use the ng run. I pass the name of my application and then desktop. Now this will build your application in serve mode. It will start your application at HTTP localhost 4200, and it will render the same application inside a desktop window. This is the magic. So here you can see that it is a desktop window. Here is a menu, the native menu, the buttons, maximize, minimize, close, and this inside is a Chromium window, right? So you have all the functionalities that you get with Chrome. For example, developer tools. You can inspect your application. You have a console. And somewhere here, you have a network. Yeah, this is a network. Right, let's put it here now. I will show you something magic now with both applications. This is a desktop, this is a web, right? If I make a change to my Angular application, for example, I will change this title to Angular Athens Rocks and save it. you will see that it compiles the application and reloads in both windows. How awesome is that? Also, if you don't want to use the standard configuration, the development, you can pass your own configuration to use with the library. If you go to the angular.json file and find the desktop builder, because the NGX Electronify has been built with the API of the Angular CLI builder. You can pass different options here. For example, I can say that I want my library to operate with the configuration, with the production configuration, right? So if I run again the library, it will build my application in production configuration, and it will open in the desktop window. So let me share back my screen, my slides, sorry. Where are you? Okay. Come on, you can do it. Okay, I think you can see my screen, right? All right. Let me do that once more because something is going on. Thank you. Share. I share my screen. I don't know why I can't see it. Okay, here it is. So, what are the next steps of the library? Actually, we want to implement three main features. The first one is export your Angular application as a desktop, as a single executable file, so that you can get it and upload it to your server or give it to your clients, or I don't know what case you would like to support. Because right now, the library runs your application in development mode, right? The second one would be to integrate some Chrome extensions that work with Angular, for example, Augury, so that you can get a better debugging experience inside the Electron window. And the third and most important is to provide you with the wrapper, with a service that acts as a wrapper API over the Electron API, so that you can write your custom code in the Angular application, and you can run your custom function in the Electron environment. Maybe you want to interact with the file system. So yeah, that's all from me. I hope you like it. When I was sharing my code, I felt too embarrassed because I use ESLint yet. Sorry, James. But I will migrate it someday. Yeah, so thanks a lot for this, that you watched my demo. I hope you liked it.
All right. Thank you, Aris. I think we have one question for you. Yeah.
Yes, hello from me, Aris.
Hi,
Thanks
Felitos.
for having you here tonight. It was great to learning about how to electronify our Angular apps. Great tool. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one question from Priyanka. What is the benefit of running the app in desktop window instead of browser if you can do similar things at both places?
Right. I can think of three cases where you would want to create an Electron application. First, you want to emulate a multi-tab environment in your application, just like browser do. For example, your application can open multiple tabs inside the same application. Second, you want to give a native look and feel in your application with the native menu, and the buttons on the top that you can maximize and minimize. Third, and most important, that if you have an already desktop application and you want to create a tool that cooperates with this application, you can create a desktop one with Electron so that they can talk each other.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
I think we don't have another one.
No.
We are done.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. See you later.
See you later.
Bye.
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 All right. So now we have the last talk from Alex about how we can localize our Angular apps. Yes, Alex. Hello, Alex.
Hello everybody. Thanks for joining. Thank you for inviting me here today.
You're welcome. Alex, I think you organize a meetup in UK, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I organized Angular Meetup. I started basically from kind of the same reasons, like you, to help and spread
Which
the
one?
Angular love.
Is the Angular Birmingham?
It's Angular Birmingham. Yes,
Yeah.
I've started, I think, around 3 years ago.
Nice.
And not many people were using it, the new Angular at that time. So I wanted to, share my knowledge because I was very passionate about it and still am. Yeah.
All right. And how about this presentation that you have today? Do you use the built-in library that comes from Angular, the i18n, in your projects, or?
Yes. So for this one, we're using the Angular Zone i18n library, and I'll show you. We translate. We have a demo with an app that we translate. We're using the translation in two ways. One is using a build. And one, we're gonna use it a runtime translation, which is now possible. It wasn't before, so since IB, now it's possible. So you'll see.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people were using NGX Translate before. So
yes, yeah.
So I will let you present and enjoy.
Yep. Thank you. I'll share my screen now. And woo, yes. Okay, so Angular i18 or internationalization. For some of you that might not know, you've seen it in this format as I, 18, and N. And if you don't know, that 18 means there are 18 characters between the I and the N. Similar to accessibility, you've seen it probably A, 11, Y, and so on. You might see other ones as well. So agenda for today, as I said before, so we're gonna have a bit of, we're gonna look at what is i18 and why is important. We'll see how we can use Angular's own i18 library for an Angular app. And then we'll see how to have a build time translation and runtime translation and what's the difference. And of course, we have a demo app, which is based on the Angular example. So we have a kind of a shop simulator where we can, click on a product, we can buy it, we can go to the checkout, and then of course we can switch the languages. Yeah. So that's what we're gonna see today. All right. So before we start, a little bit about me. I'm a front-end architect at Aprimo. I said before about the Angular Birmingham meetup that I run and I organize. I also have, when I'm not coding, and organizing the Angular meetup, I love to spend time with my little one, which he's 3 years old, almost 4 now. And he's very passionate about planets and the universe and the solar system, of course. And I learn new things every day, which is amazing. One cool thing, which I've learned recently, like how close do you think the moon is to Earth? And looking up on the sky, you see there sometimes it's quite big, when it's full moon especially, and you might think that it's quite close, but it's actually 400,000 kilometers away. If you drive in a car with like 100 kilometers per hour, it would take you around 6 months to get to the moon from Earth. or if you want it, in a different way, in the distance between Moon and Earth, you can fit all the other planets. It's just amazing. I learn new things every day thanks to him, which is quite good. Other than that, I like running. I like reading books as well. And I think that's enough about me. Let's go on with our talk about IATN. So what is and why do we need to internationalize our app? These days, it's so easy to reach to people almost everywhere in the world. So I think it's very important to make sure that when they visit our app or the website or our product, we have to make sure that they feel like they're home and not in a kind of a foreign country, and feel them and make them feel welcomed on our application. So initially, when I first started to look into this years ago, I thought it's just about translation. You're like, yeah, we just translate the words from one, from English to French or English German, English, Greek, and that's it. But it's way, way, way more than that. And there's a very nice talk by Naomi Meyer at Angular Connect, where she goes into a lot of details and what to consider, from numbers, percentages, currencies, colors, images, handling the text direction, thinking about long names. Sometimes you might have a word which is, 4 characters in English or in your own language, but then you look in German and it's 80 or 100. You don't know. So we have to be, careful about this as well. Also sorting, you might sort, from A to Z, but does it make sense in Chinese to sort from A to Z? Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. And one thing when I watched this talk that I was blown away, was about the colors, which if you didn't know, for example, in the stock market in our area, Europe, America, we usually have green for when things go well. When it goes up, it's green. When it goes down, it's red. But if you look at in Japan stock exchange, you see that actually is the other way around. When it goes up, it's red, and when it goes down, it's green. So she mentions this, Naomi, her talk as well, and I was like, what? Yeah, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. So there's many things which you probably don't know. So yeah, it's not just translating the words from one language to another. But today we're gonna look at that. So let's see what options we have available at the moment. And there's quite a few. The Angular community is amazing. Of course, we've got the Angular's own IATN. We have Transloco. We have NGX Translate. We have Angular IATN, which I think not many people know about it, but I had a look and it looks quite good. And then we have Local, which is, I would say, an extension to the Angular's own IATN, and it provides a lot of functionality out of the box, and it makes it a bit easier to work with it. So if we want to internationalize our app, first thing we need to, of course, add the Angular localized library. After that, we have to go through our app and we have to mark the text for translation. After that, we're going to run a CLI command that would generate the translation file, which is in an XLIF format by default. Then that file contains kind of translation units, which we'll see later in the slides. And then we get that file to various translator to translate in different languages, and we have a file for each language that we want to have in our app. And then, of course, we build and we serve the app. So let's see, how do we mark the text for translation? And there are 2 ways now. The IATN HTML attribute and the localize tag template function, template literal. And we'll see some examples of how to use both. Some of you which might have looked into this before, you know that localize, it wasn't publicly available. I would say it was there, but it wasn't in the documentation. So a few days ago, I think around 10 or 11 days ago, we actually have documentation. If you go now and search into Angular docs for localize, you'll find documentation there. We also have for load translations and clear translations as well, which we'll see later. But let's first look at IATN. So if we have a text in our templates, we can, the simplest form is just to add IATN, and that's it. But there's more to it. There's situations where we want to give a bit more details about that text, because it might mean, something different. And if you don't have the context, when you send this file to a translator, if he or she doesn't have the context, it might come out as something else in that language. So we have these options where we can provide a meaning, we can provide a description as well, and an ID. So by default, if we just have it as this, it will generate an ID automatically, but it's recommended to provide your own IDs. Also, for accessibility, we have to provide, in this case, for images, an alt text to describe what that image is about. So we want to translate this sort of text as well. And to do that, we have IATN, a dash, and then in this case, alt, because we want to translate alt, but it applies to other attributes as well. And you just have the attribute in here. And of course, the same options apply here. We can provide a meaning, a description, and an ID as well. So the other options, if there are cases where you don't have the text in your templates all the time, so there are options where we do have it in the components. And for those situations, now it's possible, actually since Angular 9 and IV, it is possible to use this localize function to translate our strings inside the components. This is again the simplest form, and then we can also provide like the IATN tag, a meaning, a description, and an ID. And we have to be careful. We have to put them between colons like this. If you do have a string that contains a colon, then you can escape it as well. So after we go through all the app, we mark all our strings for translation. Then we need to generate that translation file. And the way to do that, we run ng extract IATN, we give it the path, and it will generate a file like this called messages.xlf. Then we get this file, we send this file to our translators, they translate the strings, and it comes back to us, and then I have it here for Greek, so this .el. So if we have a look, I've got this online XLIF editor. So I've loaded my translated file already, and there are various tools for it, but this is just some online tool that I found. So I've loaded my file here, and you can see I've got hello, and then you can put your, it says the ID, the site header, some notes, which is greeting the customer, a company logo, here, so that's why it's good to have those descriptions in there. All right. So let's look what actually gets generated. Here we have the localize with site header, greeting, and the ID, and our message that we want to translate. So what gets translated in the file is a bunch of trans unit, which is a translation unit. The ID. So I've got the ID here. Oops. Which of course is the ID from here. If we don't provide an ID, one will get generated automatically. Then we have a source line, which is this one from here, and is the actual language, your default language of the app. Then we have this context group, which says where this text appears and at which line in that file. And also our description, from here, greeting the customer, and then the meaning, site header, which is this one. So what happens then, to translate this one, we need to add another line after source, which is called target. So we copy paste our file, let's say, and then we name it with the locale of that language. And then we provide a target underneath the source, which is the actual translated text. Everything else remains the same. Nothing changes here. And that's what we do. We go through all the file. Or the translators using the tool would go through the file. They save the file, and it would come back in a format like this. Of course, there's some configuration as well that we need to do in the Angular JSON for it to work. So in the IATN group, we need to provide our source locale. In my case, is ENGB. Based on wherever your application is, it might be something else. And then we provide the languages or the locales where we want to translate our app to what language, and we provide the path to it. Then we can say, for the build, when we build for each locale, and also if we want to serve it and try it in a specific language, we can provide a serve configuration. And here we're saying that we want to build the EL locale. To run a specific locale, we can run it like this: ng serve configuration EL. And then when we want to build it for production, for example, we can say ng build -- prod localize, and this would build it, and we would generate. It would generate the files, the translated files, and it would provide 3 or not folders for each build folder for each language. So we'll see this in the app a bit later. We can handle plurals. I'm not going to go into this too much because the code is more important. But if we have plurals, we can provide it in a template like this with the ICU, with the international component for Unicode. So the format is something like this, where we have our variable, then we say we want a plural, and then we say if it's equal to 1, we have this, which is called item. If I have 1 item, I'm gonna say you have 1 item in your basket. If you have 0 or more, then we want to use the items, and then we say other. So what gets translated is the source looks like this. So you have your text in there with this interpolation. In this case is for this one, because this is our variable that we have it in the text as well. And then we have this ICU. And then the target, we have the target, which looks like this, which in here, one thing to be aware of, in here, you only translate the text. So you only translate this bit and this bit. Yeah. But you don't translate this item and this one. These remain the same because it generates another translation unit where you actually go and translate. And I know this is wrong, and thanks to Funnies, I've got the right version. But is in the app is not in the image. I took the image before doing the proper translation. Okay. So yeah, this is again showing the format, and again in each language, it's different the way we specify plurals. I'm not gonna spend too much on this one. So one thing to be aware of is words that have different meaning. They're the same word, but has different meaning. So in my case here, I've got right twice. In one situation, it means move to the right, like a direction. But you have some situations, if you have like a quiz where it means it's correct, it's right or wrong. So imagine if you send just this right to somebody to translate it, it would be whatever it comes in their mind. If right for them things like, okay, is direction right, they're going to translate it as right in that language. But it might be the wrong thing. So that's why it's good to provide a meaning and a description as well in these situations. And another thing to be aware of, if the meaning is the same, but the description is different, it will still generate only one ID. So you have to be careful to have different meanings in this situation. Because if the meaning is the same, and you might have, the same words for the same meaning, direction, right, but maybe with a different description, and it might make more sense. But what gets translated, what gets generated is only one translation unit in that situation. So one thing to be aware of. So now we look at Angular localize. So it became available with Angular v9 and Ivy. The way we use it, we have this template literal function, which is called localize, to translate strings in our components. And then we have load translations and clear translation when we want to load translation at runtime. So we'll see this in the code after. But before, let's see what this tag template literal stuff. So here I've got a function, a tag function, which is called greet. I've got a template literal, which is hello and the username and the variable. So the equivalent function would be something like this. I've got greet and I've got two arguments. The first argument is an array of all the text bits from inside. So if we look here, the first argument is the array, and it contains the first element in the array is hello, including this space. And then the second element is this bit, is the exclamation mark. And then the second argument is the actual variable. If you have more arguments, if I had another one after the exclamation mark, then it would come here as another argument. So we'll have like 3 arguments in total for my function. So quick quiz, and if you can please write into the comments, and then we'll have a look after to see who's right. So I've got my username here, Alex. This is the function greet, which is the same function like here, and here is the implementation of it. So I've got a text array, which is my array of all the string bits, and then I've got this ph1, which is the first argument. So please think and write it in the comments. What do you think that this would output, this console log of text array plus this, and then the ph1 in this situation, and what it would output in this situation? So I'll wait 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I don't know, because I've got the answer on the next slide as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So this is what it will output. Because this is the text array is an array, the way it outputs is hello, comma, space, then another comma, and then this is how it goes to string, the toString function of this. This is how it outputed with a comma, and then this exclamation mark, then this character, and then Alex in this situation. And then in this situation, I'm outputting them, the items in the array kind of one by one. So here, because I don't have a third item, yes, because it only is this one and this one, it says undefined. And then, of course, here you can see again that it's including the space. So because it's a template literal and is literally having everything inside of it, all the spaces, you have to be aware of the spaces. Not to be aware, but just to know that it has the spaces inside as well. Cool. Right. So now we're gonna look at the builds and we'll see what happens in both cases when we build and we use build time translation, and then when we use the runtime translation. So if when we use the build time translation, what we get in our dist folder, it's something like this. So for each local, for each language, we get a folder, and everything is translated in there. So this contains the translated strings already. So if we then look into the source code, you will see that the localized function is gone, and it looks like this. So this is the actual Greek letters in here. And it looks like that. Yes, this is a way. So when we have, like, for example, this username, we can also specify an ID for this placeholder. By default, it generates this ph for the placeholder. But we can also have colons. We can have a colon. here, the user first name, for example, and then that gives it another ID in the source instead of PH to make it more obvious. Yeah. Okay. So now let's look at the code. So if I go back here, so this is the runtime. I'm gonna switch the branches. All this code is available on GitHub. So we'll go here. Let's wait for this to build, and let's have a look inside. Actually, let's start again just to make it obvious. So as you see here, I'm just running start without specifying a translation. So it just does the ng-serve, of course. All right. So you can see here, because in this situation, we're doing runtime because I'm not specifying a language to translate. So this is a runtime. We have all the localize tags in here. Yeah. So there's all my tags are in here. So you can see I've got my app component, and it's the same. So I forgot to mention what happens, the IATN tag, and Pete has a really nice article explaining how it all works, the whole build. But what happened, the IATN tag gets converted to a localize in the compile, and then when we build the app for production with the translations, it then copies the whole build artifacts, and then it replaces all the localize functions with the actual translated text. So this is if we do build time translation. If we do runtime translation, this translation replacer doesn't happen. So we have only one app generated, and then we have to handle loading the translation ourselves at runtime. If we don't do that and we want to use the build time, then the way that Angular says in the documentation, for example, to use, you can have it per URLs. So we can have in our case, we have this /en, or we can also have /el. And then what will happen, the server would look for this folder, and it would load your bundle from that folder. If it goes to en, it loads it from the other folder. So that's the build time translation. The runtime translation is only one bundle, which contains the localize, and then we have to load the translations ourselves. So now if I do this one and I say I want to start it, but I want to in Greek. So if we look quickly at this package JSON, just does ng-serve with configuration el. So now if we run this one, which is doing the Greek translation, let's see. So now you can see that my localize function is gone and is being replaced with the actual, the Greek translation, because this is still at build time. Yeah. So this is what would happen in your situation where you would serve your app when you go to /el. It would go and it would load your bundle from the el folder. This is what would happen. So the localized function is gone and everything is replaced with the translated translated strings. I can't search for it anymore, so I don't know where are the other ones. Oh, look, there's another one here, for example. Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at runtime translation. So I'm going to switch to the other branch. Yeah, let's have a quick look actually at, but we'll look at the other branch, at some templates. So switching to this one, I'm going to run the normal build, yeah, without any translation. And while this loads, I will show you the translated file. So by default, when we run the IATN extract, this is generated. So for each, we get a translation unit with no target, just this. So you get all your files in here, and then after translation, yeah, we only add the target to it basically, and that's how the file look. Okay, so now what I've done for this one, for the runtime translation. All right, so if we look here, all right, so you can see here now it's doing the this is not, shouldn't be here. I mean, it's just me left it there. So let's look a bit in the code. So there's two ways to do it. One is that if we go into the polyfill file, we need to load this before, we need to load the translations before the app is loaded. So in here, I've used a tool from local CLI to generate a JSON. So then I've copied the translated, the JSON, the translations. I've put it in here. And then that's the way, using the load translation function from the Angular localize, this would load the translation. So if I do this even now, even though I'm using it a different way, but if I do this, let's see if I go to the main, because the other way where I'm doing it is in the main here. So this is the other way, which I'll show you in a second. But just to show you that this works, comment out this one. So now we're loading these files from here, the translations at this level in the polyfill. So if I refresh the app, I think I need to build the app again. Save it. Okay, so now we're building the app again. So this should give us, so even though this is still in English, it should show in Greek. Let's see. Okay, so let's refresh the page. And yes, you can see here is still in English because this overrides the whole thing. So this is one way, but it's not too nice, because you need to copy the file, put it here at the build process, I suppose, somewhere before you have your artifact delivered to production. But it does work. So the other way to do it, if you want to do it manually, is to use copy this JSON file. So you still have to generate the JSON file. So what I've done, I've put it in here in the assets. Yeah, so I've got the file in here. And then this toggle, what it does, it sets the locale into local storage to be EN or EL. And then when we load up, we look into local storage, we get that locale. We load that file based on the locale. So if it's EN, in case of this EN, because it's the default, we don't load anything. So we skip all this and we just boot our app normally. But if we do have a locale set, which is not EN, in that case, in our case, is EL, then it goes in there, it loads this file. And then we use the load translations to load the file. And then we bootstrap the app. So when we bootstrap the app, we already have the translations there. So we might probably have to stop this. It again. Again, in this situation, we only have one bundle. We don't have a bundle for each language, but we'll have different JSON files for each language. Or you might even do a call to your API and get it from the API instead of a JSON file. So if we look here, while this is building now, let's see. All right, so now this should work. So English is still in English. Now this is in Greek. I can still go to it. Let's click here now. So one thing to be aware of is when using the runtime translations, we need to provide the locale as well. So if we look into the app module, here I'm providing the locale myself. If we use the build time, that gets provided by Angular when the app builds, because we're specifying it in the Angular JSON, and we're saying what locales we want, and then Angular sets all that for us at the build time. But if we do runtime, nobody's setting anything for us, so we have to handle it ourselves. So in my case here, I'm loading the EL locale, and then we're using this register locale data to register it with Angular. So all the pipes work, like the date pipe and the currency pipe, for example. And then we're using the locale ID in the providers to say, to specify our locale. So in our case, again, we're reading it from local storage, otherwise is EN. There might be, of course, better ways not to use local storage. This is just something that I got up and running. So if I comment out this one, you'll see the difference. So now, so before, the way it should work is when I'm in English, see here, for example, the dollar is sign is in front. If I switch to Greek, because it's EL and it's set to be that it's here, yeah. But if I don't do this one, so if now I'm saving it, so it's gonna rebuild. Now you'll see that both of them, the Greek one and the English one, they look like this, because there's no locale applied at all. So it's using the default locale. So yeah, this is one thing to be aware, that you need to handle this, unless there's something and I'm not aware of, that might do it in a different way. But yeah, now if we look here, we can see it back as how it should be on the locale. Yeah, other than that is we have all the code is on GitHub. I'll share the link with you, or probably if you search for Alex Kotel in GitHub, you'll find it there. This is my latest commit in there. Yeah, I think that's it, and I think we're in time as well. So if you have any questions, if you want me to look in the code or show you anything in the code.
Thank you, Alex. It was a great presentation. We have a question from Yanis. Do you foresee Angular simplifying further the native INTN in next versions compared to NGX Translate, for example?
So I've actually asked Minko a similar question, and they're quite happy to how it works at the moment. And because before you couldn't do any translation at runtime, and now it's possible. There's nothing, I think, in the pipeline for it. Now it's stable, it's released. There's the documentation is there for it, for both the localize function is there, and then for loading translation as well. Of course, if you don't want to do this, like I've showed you that example at runtime, Olivier has that local library which provides the CLI and the core. With the CLI, you can use it to translate your XD files, to convert your XD files to JSON, and then he has functionality to make it easier for you to load your translation at runtime before the uploads, and also on lazy load as well. So if you want to load specific translation for each module, which you probably should because you don't want to load, all of them, then he provides functionality for that as well in local. So I don't think there will be much apart from fixing bugs. Probably, I don't think there is. It's quite good as it is now. It is usable. It is better than before V9 and IV. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. I hope it it makes sense. I think I went a bit quick through it, but all the code is there to look again through it. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out to me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to help you.
Yeah. And by the way, the translations for the Greek translations that you used were very accurate, and so.
Yeah, thanks, Fanis. I've first done it with Google Translate, and then I was like, I'm not trusting them. Let's ask Fanis to help me. So thanks, Fanis.
All right.
Okay, I added everyone to the stream so that we can say goodbye. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you again. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So, see you
Bye,
next
Alex.
time.
I will remove you first.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining. And I guess now it's time for the team to say goodbye.
Yep.
So, goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. See you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.